Gilbert Paul Jordan, born Gilbert Paul Elsie on December 12, 1931, came into the world in Vancouver, British Columbia. His upbringing was not one of severe poverty or extreme violence, but it was shaped by rules and restrictions that he would later rebel against. His mother was a strict Christian who banned alcohol from the family home. This early prohibition may have only deepened his curiosity for drinking, because by his teenage years, alcohol had already taken a strong hold on his life. He left school in the 8th grade and never returned to formal education. By the time he was 16, he was a daily drinker, and alcohol was already guiding his choices. This was the beginning of a lifetime struggle that would not only destroy his own future, but also take the lives of others. Without education or stability, Jordan drifted into trouble with the law, beginning a criminal record in the early 1950s. His first known conviction came in 1952, marking the start of decades of arrests for crimes ranging from theft to assault. As a young man, Jordan was already known for erratic and often aggressive behavior, especially when drinking. He seemed unable or unwilling to control himself, and over the years, his reputation as a troublemaker grew. Police encounters became common, and each new arrest added to a pattern of disregard for rules and authority. Despite the growing list of charges, most of them resulted in minimal punishment, allowing him to quickly return to the streets. Jordan's dependence on alcohol was more than a personal habit. It became part of his identity. He was known to drink extreme amounts, boasting in later years about consuming more than 50 ounces of vodka a day. Even in his early adulthood, this level of drinking made him a figure people remembered, though not always for the right reasons. During this time, he picked up various labor jobs, but rarely kept steady work. His relationships were unstable, and he often surrounded himself with others who shared his heavy drinking lifestyle. Yet beneath this chaotic surface, there were early signs of something far more dangerous, an ability to charm or disarm people just long enough to take advantage of them. These years, in the 1950s and early 1960s, would lay the foundation for the disturbing pattern he would later follow. Jordan's addiction, combined with his willingness to break the law and his growing boldness, set the stage for a method of killing, unlike anything Canadian law enforcement had seen before. But at this point, his crimes had not yet escalated to murder, at least not officially. That would come later, and when it did, it would shock the country. By the mid-1960s, Gilbert Paul Jordan had moved beyond petty crimes and drunken disturbances. His encounters with the law became more frequent and more concerning. Police reports from this period described him as unpredictable, especially when heavily intoxicated. His drinking was no longer a habit, it was a compulsion that shaped every aspect of his life. Jordan began spending much of his time in Vancouver's downtown east side, a neighborhood known for poverty, addiction, and a vulnerable population. Here he found a constant supply of drinking companions, many of whom were struggling with alcohol dependency themselves. This environment provided him with both cover for his behavior and a pool of potential victims. In 1961, Jordan was convicted of indecent assault, marking his first recorded offense that hinted at a willingness to harm others directly. Over the next decade, he accumulated more charges, including theft, assault, and disorderly conduct. While many offenders might try to stay out of trouble after multiple arrests, Jordan seemed to thrive on risk. He learned how to manipulate situations, often using his ability to drink vast amounts of alcohol as a kind of performance to impress or disarm people. By the early 1970s, his alcohol tolerance had reached a staggering level. Witnesses claimed he could consume extraordinary amounts in a single sitting without losing complete control. Jordan began using this ability in a way that would later horrify investigators, encouraging others to drink with him, sometimes in dangerous quantities. His method was subtle at first. He would buy drinks for people he met in bars or on the street, often targeting those who were already intoxicated or in need of companionship. He presented himself as a generous drinking partner, but his true intentions were far darker. In these early years, there is evidence to suggest that deaths linked to extreme alcohol consumption may have occurred around him, though no official murder charges were filed at the time. Jordan's encounters with police during this period followed a pattern: short arrests, minimal sentences, and quick releases. Law enforcement often saw him as just another chronic drunk causing trouble, unaware that his behavior was developing into something far more deliberate. By the end of the 1970s, Jordan had refined a deadly approach that relied on alcohol, both as a weapon and as a shield. It was a method that would eventually make him one of Canada's most unusual serial killers. Someone who didn't need a firearm or a knife to take a life, just a bottle and a plan. In the years ahead, this pattern would escalate, leaving a trail of suspicious deaths that few initially connected to the man behind them. In the early 1980s, Gilbert Paul Jordan's drinking habit had become his signature and his weapon. By this time, he was well known in certain parts of Vancouver's downtown east side, often spotted in bars, hotels, and inexpensive rooming houses. What few people realized was that his heavy drinking sessions with women were sometimes ending in tragedy. Jordan began frequenting establishments where vulnerable women, many of them living with addiction or financial hardship, could be found. He would offer drinks, companionship, and sometimes cash. His charm was limited, but his persistence and willingness to spend money often overcame initial hesitation. Once a woman agreed to join him, Jordan's drinking challenges would begin. He would urge them to match him drink for drink, sometimes adding strong liquor to their beverages without them noticing. From 1980 to 1987, several women died in circumstances that police initially attributed to accidental alcohol poisoning. The victims shared similarities. Most were found in hotel rooms or private residences shortly after spending time with Jordan, and all had extremely high blood alcohol levels. In some cases, the levels were so high they would have been lethal to most people. At first, these incidents were treated as isolated tragedies in a neighborhood already plagued by alcohol-related deaths. Autopsies showed no signs of physical violence, and with little evidence beyond the presence of alcohol, investigators often closed the cases without further inquiry. Jordan seemed to understand this gap in law enforcement attention and used it to his advantage. During this period, witnesses occasionally reported hearing Jordan urging women to keep drinking, sometimes offering incentives or making it a competitive game. In one instance, a bartender recalled him encouraging a visibly impaired woman to have another, even when she was struggling to remain conscious. Police records show that Jordan continued to face minor charges for public drunkenness and disorderly behavior throughout these years, but none connected him directly to the deaths. The absence of overt violence allowed him to operate without serious scrutiny, even as the number of unexplained alcohol-related fatalities around him grew. By the mid-1980s, whispers about Jordan's possible involvement in these deaths began circulating among some in the community. Still, without clear evidence, law enforcement had no grounds for a serious criminal case. It would take one final, highly suspicious death to bring him into the full focus of investigators and expose the deadly pattern he had perfected over years. By late 1987, police in Vancouver began noticing troubling similarities in a series of alcohol-related deaths involving women. Reports from coroners revealed that several victims had blood alcohol levels far beyond what would normally be survivable. In more than one case, the last person seen with these women was Gilbert Paul Jordan. The turning point came in November of that year. Jordan had checked into a local hotel with a woman, and within hours, she was found dead. Her blood alcohol level was recorded at more than 4 times the legal limit for driving, a concentration considered life-threatening. Staff members recalled seeing Jordan leave the room alone, calm and unhurried. This time, however, police decided not to treat the case as just another unfortunate accident. Investigators quietly began tracking Jordan's movements. Over the course of several days, undercover officers observed him visiting bars, approaching women, and enticing them to drink heavily. They documented conversations in which he repeatedly urged the women to consume more alcohol, sometimes offering cash or making lighthearted bets to encourage them. During this surveillance period, officers intervened more than once to prevent potential tragedies. In one incident, they entered a hotel room to find a woman unconscious, with Jordan beside her. She was rushed to the hospital, where medical staff determined her blood alcohol level was dangerously high, but not yet fatal. This confirmed the suspicion that his behavior was not coincidental, but deliberate. Police soon gathered enough evidence to connect Jordan to multiple suspicious deaths dating back several years. The challenge was that the manner of killing, forcing or persuading victims to consume lethal amounts of alcohol, was legally complex to prosecute, especially since there were rarely physical signs of assault. Still, investigators pressed forward, compiling a case that would focus on the most recent incidents, where evidence and witness testimony were strongest. By the end of November 1987, Jordan was arrested and formally charged in connection with the death of one woman and the attempted killings of several others. His arrest made headlines across Canada, shocking the public with the unusual and unsettling nature of his alleged crimes. While the details would emerge more fully in court, it was already clear that the authorities had finally cornered a man who had managed to operate in plain sight for years without serious consequence. The trial of Gilbert Paul Jordan began in early 1988. Prosecutors focused on his pattern of behavior, presenting evidence from the hotel surveillance, witness statements, and coroner reports. They emphasized how Jordan had repeatedly supplied alcohol to vulnerable women, resulting in fatal overdoses, and how police had intervened to prevent additional deaths. The courtroom heard how his actions over more than 2 decades created a deadly pattern that distinguished him from accidental cases of alcohol poisoning. Jordan pleaded not guilty, maintaining that the deaths were unintentional and that he had no criminal intent. The defense argued that the women were responsible for their own alcohol consumption. However, the prosecution successfully used similar fact evidence, showing a consistent pattern of behavior across multiple incidents. This approach allowed the jury to see a clear link between Jordan's actions and the deaths, demonstrating that the fatalities were not isolated accidents. After several weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict in late 1988. Gilbert Paul Jordan was found guilty of manslaughter in the death of Vanessa Lee Buckner, as well as charges related to the attempted deaths of other women. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, though his sentence was later reduced on appeal. He served 6 years before being released on parole in 1994. Despite the relatively short prison term, Jordan's case remained a stark example of the legal challenges in prosecuting deaths caused indirectly by a perpetrator. The impact of the case extended beyond the courtroom. It raised awareness of how marginalized communities, particularly Indigenous women struggling with addiction, could be systematically overlooked by authorities. Public debate focused on the responsibility of society to protect vulnerable populations and the need for better investigative procedures. Jordan's ability to evade serious charges for so long highlighted significant gaps in policing, law enforcement coordination, and social services. Gilbert Paul Jordan died in 2006 from health complications related to his long-term alcoholism. While he was never convicted of murder, his legacy remains one of infamy in Canadian criminal history. The case continues to be studied by criminologists, law enforcement, and advocates for vulnerable communities as a warning of how easily predators can exploit societal neglect. Ultimately, the story of Gilbert Paul Jordan is not just about a single man, but about systemic failures, overlooked victims, and the importance of vigilance in protecting those most at risk. His crimes serve as a reminder of the dark consequences when society fails to act, leaving vulnerable people exposed to harm for far too long. Cynthia Elizabeth Hack was born on June 12, 1944, in the small town of Oliver, British Columbia, Canada. She was the daughter of Otto and Matilda Hack. Her father was a strict and disciplined English teacher who had also served as a colonel in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Her mother, known to family as Tilly, was a homemaker. Cindy was one of 6 children, with 3 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her family was of Russian heritage, and for part of her youth, she lived in Ottawa because of her father's military career. Cindy's upbringing was shaped by her father's firm and traditional parenting style. In her personal diaries, she wrote that her father had been very strict, and that she sometimes feared his disciplinary actions, which included physical punishment. Despite this, she did well in school, and eventually found her passion in the healthcare field. In 1962, Cindy enrolled in nursing school in Vancouver. During this time, her family had moved to France after her father re-enlisted in the military. Cindy visited them during her holidays, and in letters home, she wrote about a man she claimed to be engaged to, an intern she had met while in training. According to her, this man had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and tragically took his own life while the two were on a skiing trip. However, her family never met him, and she never shared his name. In the summer of 1965, Cindy met Roy Makepeace, a psychiatrist from South Africa who was 18 years older than she was. They married in December of the following year. The same year, Cindy graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Her family had concerns about the relationship, especially her father, who believed Makepeace had taken advantage of Cindy's trusting nature. Cindy began working as a pediatric nurse at Vancouver General Hospital, where Makepeace had also worked at one point. Though they had professional success, their marriage grew strained over time. Cindy later claimed that the relationship was abusive, while Makepeace denied this, saying he had only ever slapped her twice during their marriage. Despite earning a medical license in South Africa, Makepeace failed to pass licensing exams in Canada and instead took a position at the University of British Columbia. In 1975, Cindy started working at Blenheim House, a care facility for children with behavioral issues. She served as a team coordinator and remained there for over a decade. Her co-workers described her as kind, dedicated, and professional. Although her marriage to Makepeace had ended by this point, the two remained in occasional contact. To others, Cindy appeared to be living a normal, successful life. She had a respected career, maintained close ties with her family, and was known for being responsible and compassionate. But beneath the surface, something was changing. In the early 1980s, a different story began to emerge. One of fear, confusion, and danger. It started with a strange phone call, and from there, Cindy's life would slowly unravel into one of the most baffling and controversial mysteries in Canadian history. In the early months of 1982, Cindy James began experiencing a series of events that would quickly spiral into something far more terrifying. She reported receiving anonymous phone calls, some silent, others filled with whispers, threats, or heavy breathing. These calls often came late at night, leaving her shaken and afraid. At first, she tried to brush them off, believing they might be pranks, but the calls continued, growing in intensity and frequency. Not long after the phone calls began, Cindy started discovering threatening notes around her home. These were often made from magazine clippings or written in crude block letters. One note read, "Soon, Cindy," while others simply said, "Dead meat." She also began finding disturbing items left on her doorstep, including pieces of raw meat and dead cats. Her front porch light was smashed several times, and someone began cutting the phone lines leading into her house. Fearing for her safety, Cindy contacted the Vancouver Police Department and filed her first report. Over the next several years, she would make nearly 100 calls to the police. Officers visited her home repeatedly, and investigators opened files on what they referred to as a stalking case. Cindy said she had no idea who was behind the harassment, but she believed someone was watching her every move. In January of 1983, she was attacked in her home for the first time. She told police that she had gone outside to check her car when someone grabbed her from behind. She said the assailant choked her with a cord and slashed her hand with a knife before fleeing. Cindy was terrified and confused. She was taken to a hospital, and photos were taken of her injuries. The police found no signs of forced entry, and neighbors reported seeing nothing unusual. As the incidents escalated, Cindy began altering her lifestyle. She painted her car a different color and changed her last name from Makepeace to James, hoping it would help her avoid the person tormenting her. She moved homes several times and even hired private investigators. One of them, Ozzy Caban, took her claims seriously and installed surveillance equipment, but no intruder was ever captured on camera. She also began to record every suspicious activity, keeping detailed notes of each event. On multiple occasions, she reported seeing a man lurking around her property. Once, she claimed to have seen someone peering into her windows. Police conducted interviews and staked out her home at times, but there were no arrests and no suspects. By 1984, Cindy's mental health began to deteriorate. Friends and family noticed she was becoming withdrawn, anxious, and sleep-deprived. Some began to wonder if the stress was causing her to imagine the events. Others believed she was genuinely in danger, but that the police weren't taking her seriously enough. Then came another disturbing incident. One evening, Cindy was found semi-conscious in her basement, with a nylon stocking tightly wound around her neck. Her hands and feet were tied. She had no memory of how she got there. A neighbor found her and called emergency services. Once again, the police found no sign of forced entry. Investigators began to question whether Cindy might have staged the attack herself. Despite the growing doubts around her case, Cindy insisted she was not doing these things to herself. She feared she was being watched, followed, and targeted. And in the following years, the violence against her would only intensify, leading to outcomes even more disturbing than before. By the spring of 1985, Cindy James's situation had grown even more disturbing. On multiple occasions, she was discovered in alarming conditions, injured and disoriented, often with no clear memory of how she had ended up that way. One incident took place in a ditch 6 miles from her home, where she was found with her hands and feet bound and a black nylon stocking once again tied around her neck. Her clothes had been ripped, and she had several bruises on her body. Medical staff noted that she appeared sedated, though no drugs were immediately found in her system. Despite these attacks, authorities were increasingly skeptical. Each time Cindy was found bound or hurt, there were no witnesses and no forensic evidence pointing to another person. Many officers within the Vancouver Police Department began to theorize that Cindy was orchestrating the incidents herself, either to seek attention or as a result of psychological trauma. However, not everyone agreed. Her private investigator, Ozzy Caban, believed that the injuries Cindy suffered were too elaborate and dangerous for her to have inflicted on herself without assistance. In one particularly troubling event, in December of 1985, Cindy was found dazed and hypothermic in a ditch with a pair of men's work boots on her feet and a pair of gloves in her hands that did not belong to her. She had been missing for several hours after failing to meet a friend for dinner. A local passerby spotted her and contacted emergency services. Once again, she had no memory of what had happened after leaving her home. In response to the growing fear for her life, Cindy took several protective measures. She adopted a large dog, installed a panic button system in her house, and began carrying pepper spray. She also continued working with private investigators. At one point, her friend and ex-husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace, allowed her to stay at his residence temporarily, hoping she would feel safer. Despite these efforts, the strange incidents persisted. During this time, Cindy also underwent extensive psychological evaluations. She visited several psychiatrists and therapists, some of whom diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative symptoms. However, none of them could agree on a definitive diagnosis. Cindy expressed genuine terror during these sessions, and her accounts remained consistent. She often spoke about a mysterious group or individual who she believed was determined to harm or kill her. Law enforcement surveillance was occasionally put in place near her home, but these operations never caught any suspects in the act. Some officers felt this further proved that the events were self-inflicted. Others believed that whoever was responsible may have been carefully watching Cindy and knew when surveillance was in place, choosing to strike only when the coast was clear. Between the years of 1986 and early 1989, Cindy moved multiple times and even changed her phone number several times. Still, the threatening messages and incidents continued. One time, a rock was thrown through her window with a note attached. Another time, she returned home to find her dog beaten and her porch light smashed once again. In several cases, her telephone wires were found deliberately cut, always cleanly severed, suggesting it was not the result of wear or accident. Throughout all of this, her mental and physical health continued to decline. Friends and family were increasingly divided. Some were convinced Cindy was being stalked by someone who had outsmarted the police for years. Others worried that the stress had taken such a toll on her that she may have been unintentionally creating the danger herself. No clear answers were found. But then, in the summer of 1989, Cindy vanished, marking the final and most tragic chapter in her long, strange ordeal. On the evening of Thursday, May 25th, 1989, Cindy James disappeared. Earlier that day, she had stopped by the Richmond General Hospital to pick up her paycheck. Afterward, she went to a local shopping center to run errands. Witnesses later confirmed that she mailed a letter and deposited her check at a nearby bank. She was last seen around 8 o'clock that night. Cindy never made it home. The following day, her car, a beige sedan, was discovered parked in a lot behind an abandoned grocery store. Inside the vehicle were several of her personal belongings, including the groceries she had just purchased, a wrapped gift, and her wallet, which contained a small amount of cash. Blood was found on the driver's side door and on some of the items inside the vehicle. Curiously, the car keys were found beneath the vehicle on the ground. It appeared as though the scene had been staged, but investigators were unable to confirm what had actually occurred. It was not until Friday, June 8th, almost 2 full weeks later, that Cindy's body was discovered. A man walking near an abandoned house in Richmond, not far from where her car had been found, noticed something unusual in the overgrown backyard. Cindy's body was lying in tall grass, partially hidden. Her hands and feet had been bound behind her back with black nylon, and a similar black nylon stocking had been tied tightly around her neck. She was fully clothed. An autopsy confirmed that she had been deceased for a significant period, likely since the day she disappeared. Toxicology results revealed a combination of 3 drugs in her system: morphine, diazepam, and flurazepam. The levels of these drugs were high enough to render her unconscious, or possibly even cause death. However, the exact cause of death was not immediately determined. While the drugs were lethal, the ligature marks on her neck were consistent with strangulation, though they may have occurred after death. The circumstances of Cindy's death created immediate conflict between investigators. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police concluded that Cindy had taken her own life. They believed she had injected herself with a dangerous drug cocktail, tied herself up, and staged her own death in a final elaborate act. However, many medical experts, and nearly all of her family and friends, found this explanation unconvincing. For one, there was serious doubt that Cindy could have physically bound herself in such a complex manner after taking such powerful drugs. The tightness and positioning of the restraints suggested she had little to no mobility at the time they were applied. Several forensic specialists stated that the combination of drugs would have rendered her unconscious within minutes. There was also the issue of the nylon stocking around her neck, something that had been a repeated symbol throughout the years of harassment. Her ex-husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace, publicly disputed the theory that she took her own life. So did her sister Melanie and her parents, Otto and Tilly Hack. They firmly believed Cindy had been murdered, and that the police had failed to protect her, despite years of warning signs. Private investigator Ozzy Caban also stated that in his experience, the death had all the signs of foul play, not a result of her taking her own life. A coroner's inquest was held in the spring of 1990. It lasted over 15 days, included testimony from 84 witnesses, and examined nearly 100 exhibits. In the end, the jury was unable to determine how Cindy James had died. They ruled the cause of death as undetermined, meaning it could have been accidental, self-inflicted, or the result of foul play. To this day, the death of Cindy James remains one of Canada's most haunting, unsolved cases. There has never been an arrest. No one has been named as a suspect. And perhaps most frustratingly of all, despite the evidence, warnings, and bizarre pattern of incidents over 7 years, there is still no official answer to the question. Who, if anyone, was trying to kill Cindy James? Or was she struggling with something even more difficult to understand? The case continues to be the subject of books, documentaries, and debates, each offering its own theory. But the truth, like Cindy herself, seems to have vanished in the shadows. Robert William Pickton was born on October 24th, 1949, in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. He grew up on a pig farm just outside Vancouver, a place far from the city's busy streets. But life on the farm was far from peaceful. The Pickton family farm was described by neighbors as dirty and poorly kept, with animals wandering freely inside the house. Robert and his younger brother, David, had a difficult childhood. They were often bullied at school because of their messy appearance and the strong farm smell that followed them everywhere. Robert struggled in school and was placed in special education classes after failing second grade. He had a close, if complicated, relationship with his mother, but reportedly a troubled and distant connection with his father. One story that sticks out is from when Robert was about 12 years old. He raised a calf that he loved, but one day he came home to find it had been killed. This experience, combined with the neglectful environment, seemed to harden him and may have influenced how he viewed other living beings. After leaving school, Robert worked as a meat cutter apprentice for nearly 7 years. When his parents died in the late 1970s, he and his siblings inherited the family farm. Instead of leaving, Robert and his brother stayed and began hosting wild parties at the farm, which they called the Piggy Palace. These gatherings included various people from the local community, and the farm became known for its chaotic and lawless atmosphere. However, behind the scenes, Robert Pickton was hiding a dark and terrible secret that would later shock all of Canada. During the 1990s, the downtown east side of Vancouver became the center of growing concern. This neighborhood faced severe poverty, addiction, and homelessness. Many women living and working there were vulnerable, and they began to vanish without explanation. These women were often Indigenous and marginalized, making them especially at risk and frequently overlooked by society and law enforcement. Between the mid-1990s and early 2000s, numerous women disappeared from this area. Families reported them missing, but their cases did not receive the attention they deserved. Police often viewed these women through a lens of suspicion due to their involvement in drug use or work on the street, leading to delayed or minimal investigation. This lack of urgency allowed the disappearances to continue without immediate action. Meanwhile, Robert Pickton was exploiting this vulnerability. He used promises of money, drugs, and shelter to lure women to his farm in Port Coquitlam. What happened once they arrived was horrific. Over time, evidence would show that many women never left his property alive, turning the farm into a place of unimaginable tragedy. The growing number of missing women was a silent alarm that something terrible was happening, but the full story was still hidden from the public eye. Despite the growing number of missing women, police efforts to stop Robert Pickton were plagued by serious problems. One of the earliest missed chances came in March of 1997. A woman escaped from Pickton's farm, badly injured and terrified, and told police he had attacked her. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder and other offenses. But surprisingly, the charges were dropped in 1998 because prosecutors believed the victim's addiction issues made her unreliable. This decision had tragic consequences. After the charges were dropped, many more women went missing. Police had evidence from that earlier case, including Pickton's clothing, with DNA from missing women, but it was not properly tested for years. Additionally, tips from informants about Pickton's suspicious activities were ignored or mishandled. A major problem was poor communication between two police forces, the Vancouver Police Department and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The farm was in the RCMP's area, but the missing women reports came to the Vancouver police. This lack of coordination delayed the investigation. Later, a public inquiry called Forsaken exposed the systemic failures and biases that allowed Pickton to continue. It revealed that many officers and officials dismissed the missing women's cases because of their background and lifestyle. This failure to take the disappearances seriously created a dangerous environment that allowed a serial killer to operate freely for years. The breakthrough in the Robert Pickton case came in early 2002, but it was not related to the missing women investigation. A former employee reported seeing illegal firearms in Pickton's trailer, which gave the Royal Canadian Mounted Police enough reason to obtain a search warrant for the farm. On February 5th, 2002, a joint task force from the Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP began searching the Port Coquitlam property. What they uncovered was horrifying. The farm was cluttered with old buildings, junk, and signs of long-term neglect. As they searched, police found personal belongings belonging to many missing women, including jewelry and clothing. Then human remains were discovered. This led to the largest forensic investigation in Canadian history, costing about $70 million. Specialists used heavy machinery and forensic technology to carefully examine the soil and buildings. In total, DNA from over 30 women was found on the property. Investigators also found severed body parts stored in containers and scattered remains across the farm. These discoveries confirmed the worst fears about Pickton's crimes and marked the beginning of his final legal battle. Robert Pickton was arrested on February 22nd, 2002, and initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Over time, these charges grew to 26 counts. During his time in custody, an undercover officer posed as an inmate and recorded Pickton confessing that he had killed 49 women. He even said he regretted not reaching 50 victims, admitting his capture was due to carelessness. The trial began in January 2007, focusing on 6 of the murder charges to ensure a strong case. These 6 victims represented only a portion of the women whose remains were found on the farm. On December 9th, 2007, Pickton was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, but was acquitted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years, the harshest sentence allowed under Canadian law at the time. The remaining charges were stayed in 2010, a decision that left some families frustrated, feeling justice was incomplete. However, the case sparked important national conversations about the treatment of missing and murdered Indigenous women and the failures within law enforcement. Robert Pickton remained in prison until his death on May 31st, 2024, at the age of 74, after being assaulted by another inmate. His crimes and the failures that allowed them to continue serve as a powerful reminder of the need to protect society's most vulnerable members. The Pickton case changed Canada forever, shining a light on systemic issues that are still being addressed today.